The judge looked across the courtroom at my daughter and spoke 6 words that drained the color from her face. The adoption is granted and finalized. Dan, after 15 years of raising the grandson she had abandoned, after she waltzed back into our lives demanding him like a piece of property, after everything she put us through, I finally held the one thing she could never take away from me: legal proof that he was mine. And my name is Barbara, though everyone calls me Barb, and I'm sitting here now in my kitchen in Ohio. The same kitchen where I made countless school lunches and helped with homework projects for my grandson. And before I tell you this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. So drop a comment and let me know, because I always wonder who's out there listening to an old woman's story. And to understand how we ended up in that courtroom, you have to go back 15 years, back to the night my entire world changed. In November 2008, when the economy had just crashed and people were losing everything, and I was sitting in my living room watching the evening news, when my phone rang at 11:47 p.m., a time I remember clearly because I looked at the clock and thought nothing good ever comes from a call that late. And it was my daughter Jennifer, whom I hadn't heard from in 3 months. And she said, "Mom," in a shaking voice, before telling me she needed me to come get him. And when I asked him, she meant my 3-month-old grandson Mason, a baby I'd only seen twice since Jennifer gave birth, once at the hospital, and once when she needed money for diapers and formula. And when I asked what was going on, and whether Mason was okay, she broke down, saying he wouldn't stop crying, that she couldn't do this, that she couldn't, and told me she was at the Motel 6 on Route 40 in room 127, and begged me to just come get him, because she needed to figure her life out. And within 5 minutes, I was in my car, in my nightgown with a coat thrown over it, the 20-minute drive stretching into hours. And when I knocked on that motel room door, what I saw broke something inside me, because the room was filthy. Fast food wrappers everywhere, empty soda cans on every surface, ashtrays overflowing with cigarette butts. The smell hitting me first, stale smoke mixed with something sour I couldn't even identify. And there on the floor in a car seat, not even on the bed, was Mason, my grandson, crying so hard his little face had turned purple, tiny fists clenched, wearing a onesie that looked like it hadn't been changed in days, stained with formula or spit up. I couldn't quite tell in the dim light of that awful room, while Jennifer paced by the window and wouldn't even look at me, only 23 years old, my only child, yet looking like a stranger with bloodshot eyes, dark circles underneath them, shaking hands running through unwashed hair, so much weight lost, she barely resembled the girl who'd been captain of her high school volleyball team, and once had such a bright future. And when I asked how long he'd been crying, she said she didn't know, maybe hours, and told me she just needed a break, and asked me to take him for a few days while she got herself together, because she'd met a guy named Derek with a job opportunity in Phoenix, a fresh start. But she couldn't bring a baby, not yet. And when I picked Mason up, the smell hit me again, and I wondered when she'd last changed him, finding his diaper bag nearly empty with only 2 diapers and a half-empty bottle of formula still warm to the touch. And when I repeated a few days while gently bouncing him, and his cries began to quiet, just from being held, I asked when she'd last fed him, and she actually shrugged, saying, "This morning, I think." Anne told me not to look at her like that because I didn't understand the pressure she was under, that she never wanted to be a mom this young, that Tyler Mason's father had taken off the moment she told him she was pregnant and she'd been doing this alone. And when I said quietly that she hadn't been doing it at all, and asked whether Mason had seen a doctor for his 3-month checkup, and she shrugged again, that was the moment I knew this wasn't temporary, because a mother who cares doesn't shrug when asked about her baby's medical care, and a mother who plans to come back doesn't look at her son like a burden she can't wait to shed. And when I asked how long she'd be gone, she said she didn't know, maybe a month or 2, promised she'd call, already grabbing her purse and jacket and telling me I was so good with babies and always had been, and that he was better off with me anyway. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me standing in that motel room holding her 3-month-old son with nothing but a half-empty diaper bag and a stained car seat. I didn't want to examine too closely, and I should have chased after her and demanded answers, but Mason started crying again, and honestly, I felt relieved she was gone, because at least now, I could take care of him properly. That very night I stopped at a 24-hour Walmart and bought diapers, formula, baby clothes, bottles, everything he needed, spending $300 I truly didn't have while living only on my late husband's pension and my small part-time job at the library. But I didn't have a choice. And when I finally got Mason home, cleaned him up, changed him, and fed him. I discovered something that made my blood run cold. His diaper rash was so severe it had started to bleed. His tiny legs covered in angry red patches, and I kept asking myself how long she had left him sitting in dirty diapers. And over the next 3 days I called Jennifer's phone 17 times, every call going straight to voicemail, until, on the 4th day, I received a text that said she couldn't talk now because things were crazy, and ended with Mason. Okay, tell him Mama loves him. And I remember thinking he was only 3 months old. He couldn't even hold his own head up yet, and those words meant nothing to him. And as weeks turned into months, I called child services and reported the situation. They did a home visit and saw Mason was clean, healthy, and thriving in my care. Tried to locate Jennifer, but her phone was disconnected, and the address she'd given the man, apartment in Cleveland, turned out to be one she'd been evicted from months earlier. And I took Mason to the doctor. Got him caught up on his vaccinations, started him on solid foods when he was ready, and watched him roll over for the first time, sit up, crawl, and take his first steps. Every milestone Jennifer was missing by choice. And I didn't have much money because I had to quit my library job since daycare for an infant cost more than I earned $800 a month for basic care, the cheapest option I could find, so we lived on my pension alone. $1,400 a month from my late husband's railroad retirement, and after the mortgage, utilities, and basic expenses, there was almost nothing left. Some months so tight I skipped meals, just to be sure Mason had what he needed. Crying in the grocery store when I had to put back the good diapers and buy the cheap ones that gave him a rash. Choosing between buying him new shoes because his feet grew so fast, or paying the electric bill in full. Paying only half, and praying they wouldn't shut off our power. Learning to be creative by shopping at thrift stores for his clothes, finding a church that offered a free clothing exchange every month, clipping coupons, buying generic everything, watering down his juice so it would last longer, and turning the library into our second home because it was free entertainment with story time, puppet shows, and air conditioning in the summer, checking out stacks of picture books and reading them to him until he memorized them. And even though money was always scarce, we managed, because that's what you do when you love someone. And honestly, we had something money couldn't buy. We had each other, and we had joy. As I taught him his ABCs with magnetic letters on the refrigerator, made up silly songs about numbers and colors, built blanket forts in the living room when thunderstorms scared him, and told stories until the storm passed, ran beside him for hours in the summer heat. When he learned to ride a second-hand bike I'd repainted blue until he finally rode on his own, and we both cried happy tears. Planted tomatoes and green beans together in the garden, with his little hands getting dirty, and sat on the porch in the evenings eating popsicles and watching fireflies. Simple things that cost nothing but made a childhood rich. And every birthday I baked him a cake from scratch, his favorite. Chocolate with vanilla frosting, and, though we couldn't afford big parties, we invited a few friends from school, played games in the backyard, and he was always happy, never complaining about what we didn't have because he didn't know any different and because he knew he was loved. And then when Mason was 2 years old, Jennifer called out of nowhere, like no time had passed at all, cheerfully asking how her baby boy was, a tone so casual it made me want to scream as I told her he wasn't a baby anymore, that he was 2. That he walked and talked and called me Mama, followed by silence, and then her saying that was good and explaining things had gotten crazy, that she and Derek had split up, that she was back in Ohio in a different city with a job at a casino, and things were looking up. And when I asked if she wanted to see him, my heart pounded as she hesitated and said maybe soon, after she got settled, in a few months, and then she didn't call again for another year, and that became the pattern: radio silence for months. Sometimes more than a year, then a sudden call full of excuses and promises to visit soon that never happened. And when Mason started kindergarten, I was the one who held his hand on the first day, took pictures with a $15 camera I'd bought at a pawn shop, helped him learn to write his name by tracing letters over and over on construction paper. And when he made Mother's Day cards at school, he made them for me, little construction paper hearts with "I love you, Mama Barb," written in crayon, every single one pressed into a scrapbook I still keep on my nightstand. When he was 7, he asked me the question I had been dreading for years, looking up at me with flour on his hands and saying, "Mama Barb, Why doesn't my real mommy want to see me? And we were standing in the kitchen making cookies chocolate chip, his favorite, when I turned off the mixer and sat down at the table across from him, studying this beautiful little boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. And I chose my words carefully as I told him that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, that his mommy loved him but wasn't ready to be a mommy yet, that it wasn't about him, that he was perfect and wonderful and loved, and that he should never forget that. And he nodded like he understood, but I saw the hurt in his eyes, a look that would haunt me for years. And by the time Mason turned 10, Jennifer's calls had stopped altogether, and I tried to track her down through social media, finding profiles that looked like her but never being sure, sending messages that went unanswered. And part of me felt relieved because Mason had stopped asking about her, and we had settled into our routine, our life, where I went to every school concert, every parent-teacher conference, every baseball game, learned how to help with Common Core math even though it made no sense to me, stayed up late helping him build a solar system model for science class, made sure he had the right clothes for school pictures, and taught him how to tie a tie for his first school dance, all while money stayed tight as I drove a 20-year-old car that made concerning noises, bought my clothes from thrift stores, and cut my own hair. But Mason always had what he needed, always, and when he was 12, I had a health scare and ended up in the hospital with what they thought might be a heart attack, which turned out to be severe stress and exhaustion but frightened us both. And Mason sat beside my hospital bed holding my hand, this nearly teenage boy trying so hard to be brave as he whispered that he couldn't lose me, that I was all he had, and I promised him we were a team, always had been and always would be. And looking back now, I realized that hospital stay was what made me understand I needed to make it official and adopt Mason legally, because if something happened to me, Jennifer was still his legal mother and could show up and take him or put him in foster care or anything at all, a thought that kept me awake at night even though adoption cost money, lawyer fees, court costs, everything I didn't have. So I started saving what I could, $20 here, $30 there, knowing it would take years. And then Mason turned 13, and everything changed when my father, Mason's great-grandfather, passed away after spending 5 years in a nursing home where we had visited him every Sunday. And Dad loved Mason and called him his little buddy. And when Alzheimer's took hold, Mason would sit with him patiently, telling him stories and holding his hand. And after Dad's funeral, the lawyer read the will and explained that everything, his house, his savings, his life insurance, was split between me and Jennifer, about $180,000 each. And I cried not only because I'd lost my father but because that money meant security for Mason, meant fixing my car, setting aside money for college, and finally affording the adoption. And the lawyer tried to reach Jennifer through her last known phone number and address with messages and letters that went unanswered until after 3 months. He told me the money would sit in an estate account until she claimed it, or enough time passed for me to petition the court. And I didn't care about her half. I only wanted mine to secure Mason's future. But 2 weeks after I received my inheritance, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and I heard Jennifer's voice for the first time in 3 years saying she was sorry about Grandpa, and that things had been complicated, but she'd heard about the inheritance. And my stomach dropped because of course that was why she was calling. And when I confirmed Dad had left her money and the lawyer had been trying to reach her, she sounded thrilled and told me she'd been thinking about Mason lately, that she was in a much better place with a stable job and a nice apartment, and felt it was time to step up and be the mom she should have been. And I felt like the floor fell out from under me as I reminded her Mason was 13 and she hadn't seen him in over a decade. But she insisted people change, and with the inheritance she could give him a good life, things I couldn't afford. No offense. Words that hit like a slap as I told her I'd been giving him everything for 13 years, stability, a home, but she cut in to say he was her son, legally and biologically, and it was time he came home. And if this story is making your blood boil like it does mine, then you understand why I said, trying to keep my voice steady, that she couldn't just show up after 13 years and take him, because he didn't even know her. Then she said we would get to know each other, that she wasn't trying to be difficult, that she was his mother, and the law was on her side, that she was only telling me as a courtesy because I'd been helping out. She called 13 years of my life, and when I asked when she was planning this, she said she needed to get the inheritance settled first, get a bigger apartment or maybe a house, set up his room nicely, give her a couple of months, maybe do a transition where he visited on weekends first. Planning it all like Mason was a pet being rehomed and not a child. Not her child who wouldn't even recognize her face. And after she hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Then I got angry. Then I got determined. And the next morning I called a family lawyer named Patricia Mills, who came highly recommended, and I told her everything: the abandonment, the 13 years, Jennifer's sudden return, and when Patricia asked if I had documentation, I pulled out the folder I'd kept since day one, with child services reports from when I'd called them, medical records showing I took Mason to every appointment, school records listing me as his guardian, receipts for everything I'd bought him over the years that I'd saved only for tax reasons. And Patricia smiled and said it was really good, that in Ohio abandonment for a year or more without contact or support was grounds for termination of parental rights, though Jennifer would fight it. And when I said she wanted Mason because of the money, Patricia said we'd prove it, but warned me it wouldn't be cheap, around $8,000 or more. And I thought about my inheritance meant for Mason's college and our security, but new money meant nothing if I lost him. So I agreed. We filed in February. Jennifer was served in March, and that's when she showed up at my house on a Tuesday afternoon looking polished and expensive. Inheritance money clearly at work. Furious that I was trying to adopt her son, yelling until I warned her Mason would be home any minute, insisting he was hers. And I told her quietly that he was her son, until she abandoned him 13 years ago. That leaving him temporarily didn't mean 13 years. That she'd done what was easiest, not what was best. And then Mason's bus pulled up and he froze when he saw her, asked who she was, ignored her completely, as her face crumpled and she called herself his mom, confusion turning into anger as he flatly said cool, and asked to go inside because he had homework, told her he didn't know her and didn't want to, slammed the door, and she accused me of turning him against her, which I hadn't needed to do, and promised to see me in court. And the months that followed were a nightmare, as she hired a high-powered lawyer who painted me as an elderly woman stealing a child, lied about contact and support we proved never happened, attacked my age 67 arguing I might not live long enough to see Mason graduate, demanded a custody evaluation that brought a psychologist into every room of my house, into Mason's bedroom with his baseball posters and shared books, hours of interviews and tests. And when Mason was interviewed alone, I waited terrified for 2 hours, and when he came out crying, it wasn't from difficulty but fear, because all she'd asked him was where he wanted to live, and he told me that in the car afterward. I said, with you. And he asked me, what if they made him go with her? What if the judge said he had to? And I told him it wasn't going to happen, promising while praying I was right, telling him we had a good lawyer and the truth on our side, but he said she was his real mom, and didn't that matter? And I pulled the car over, turned to face him, and told him what mattered was love, being there, that she might be his biological mother, but I was the one who raised him, the one who loved him, and no judge would ignore 13 years of that. And when the custody evaluator's report came back, it was in our favor, noting Mason's bond with me, his comfort and security in my home, that Jennifer was essentially a stranger, recommending that if Jennifer received any custody at all, it should be supervised visits only, with primary custody remaining with me. But Jennifer didn't give up, and her lawyer argued that her financial stability meant she could give Mason a better life, better schools, opportunities, things I couldn't afford, which hurt because it was partly true, since on my fixed income we'd never taken a real vacation. Mason wore secondhand clothes. Our house was old and needed repairs I couldn't afford, but he was happy and loved, and I'd be damned if anyone said that wasn't enough. And the court date was set for August, 6 months after we filed. 6 months that felt like years, during which Jennifer tried twice more to see Mason, and both times he refused, sent expensive gifts on iPad, designer shoes, video games that he left unopened in the garage, telling me he didn't want her stuff, he just wanted her to go away, while my lawyer prepared us for trial with every document, receipt, and school paper organized, witnesses lined up, teachers, neighbors, baseball coach ready to testify about the life we'd built. Though Jennifer's lawyer had the law, the biological reality that Mason was her son, the fact her parental rights were never terminated, the argument that she'd been a struggling young woman 13 years ago who'd made a hard choice and was now ready to make it right, a sympathetic argument that terrified me. And the night before trial I couldn't sleep, sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m. drinking tea and imagining the worst. wondering if Mason would ever forgive the system or me, when he came downstairs unable to sleep too. And we made hot chocolate together like we always had with extra marshmallows, and he told me quietly that if the judge made him go with her, he'd run away and find his way back to me. And I told him it wouldn't happen, but if it did, he needed to know I was his real mom, not her, and nothing a judge said could change that. And I hugged him and cried. And the courthouse the next day was all marble and wood and echoing footsteps designed to make you feel small. Jennifer already there, in a perfect navy suit, hairstyled, makeup flawless, looking wealthy and capable, while I wore my best dress. 10 years old, clean and pressed, the same one from my husband's funeral. Sensible flats from Polly's, carrying a worn purse, with Patricia Mills beside me calm, in her gray suit, reminding me to be myself. The woman who raised that boy with nothing but love and determination. Mason waiting outside with a victim advocate, not allowed in, unless the judge requested him. The last thing I saw before the doors closed, his scared face trying to be brave. And then the trial began with Jennifer's lawyer painting her as an overwhelmed young woman who'd temporarily placed her son with his grandmother, always intending to reclaim him once stable, now ready with money and maturity to be the mother Mason deserved. Glossing over 13 years as if they were 5 minutes, before Patricia dismantled it year by year, milestone by milestone, entering child services reports, medical and school records, showing how often I'd reached out and been ignored, and then calling me to the stand and asking how many times Jennifer contacted me in the first 5 years of Mason's life, and I answered, 4 times. Brief phone calls. She never asked to see him, never asked for pictures, never sent money or support. And in the 5 years after that, only twice 2 phone calls, maybe 10 minutes each, and in the last 3 years before she learned about the inheritance, 0 times. And Patricia let that sink in before asking, Mrs. Walsh, why are you seeking to adopt Mason? And I looked at Jennifer, really looked at her, and saw what I needed to see. Not remorse or love, but calculation, because this was about money and control, not about a child she'd missed. And I said simply that he was my son, maybe not by birth, but in every way that mattered, that I'd loved him, raised him, sacrificed for him, been there for every nightmare, fever, triumph, and heartbreak, his mother for 13 years, only asking the court to make it official. And Jennifer took the stand next while her lawyer tried to rehabilitate her image, but Patricia's cross-examination destroyed it, asking when Mason's birthday was and Jennifer blinking and guessing October. Patricia correcting her September 3, 2008, asking about his last doctor's appointment, his baseball physical 2 weeks ago, his position, shortstop, his favorite subject, history, specifically World War II, his DIT project that won first place at the school fair, his shoe size, best friend's name, allergies, what he wanted to be when he grew up. And Jennifer couldn't answer a single question, making it obvious to everyone in the courtroom that she didn't know her son because she'd never tried. And the judge called a recess, then spoke privately with Mason for 45 minutes, after which Mason came out with red eyes but a determined face. And back in court the judge, looking tired, said he'd reviewed the evidence, heard the testimony, spoken with Mason, that while the law favored preserving parental rights, it required acting in the child's best interest, telling Jennifer that caring wasn't enough, that parenting required presence, sacrifice, unconditional love, and that for 13 years she'd chosen not to be present despite having opportunities. And she cried as he turned to me and spoke of the 13 years of documented love in school papers, medical records, photographs, and of a well-adjusted young man who knew where his home was and who his mother was. My heart pounding as the judge terminated Jennifer's parental rights, granted the adoption, and declared Mason Walsh legally my son. The courtroom erupting as Jennifer screamed, and I sat in shock, knowing it was over, that he was mine legally and permanently. Patricia hugging me while all I could think was that I needed to tell Mason, rushing to him in the waiting room where he knew the moment he saw my face, asking if we'd won. And when I said yes, he ran into my arms and we cried together. And in the brief aftermath, 3 months later, we went home that day, ordered pepperoni pizza with extra cheese, watched stupid movies, didn't talk about the trial or Jennifer, just existed, while Jennifer tried and failed to appeal, sent angry emails we ignored until they stopped. The inheritance now in Mason's college fund after adoption fees, helping secure his future, him still calling me Mama Bob, his birth certificate being reissued with my name as his legal mother, something I still stare at in disbelief. And when people ask if I regret the struggle, the money, the life put on hold? The answer is simple, not for 1 second, because Mason is my son, always has been, and now the world knows it too. 3 messages remaining. Upgrade to ChatGPT Go to keep the conversation going. Upgrade to Go.